Hey everyone, welcome back to another video by Simplilearn. I'm sure you must have watched our previous videos on Angular. If you haven't watched them already, I suggest you go through them for easy tutorials on various topics on Angular. Now, Angular developers are in demand, and I'm sure you need help in cracking your next interview. So in this video, I present to you some commonly asked Angular interview questions. But before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to our channel already, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to never miss an update. Now, let's begin. I've classified the questions into two sections. One is the beginner level questions and one is the advanced level questions. So now let's begin with beginner level questions. Starting with the most basic, what exactly is Angular? Now, Angular is an open source JavaScript front-end framework which is completely written in TypeScript. This framework brings structure and consistency to web applications and provides excellent scalability and maintainability. Now, it's primarily aimed to develop single-page applications and is maintained by Google. It uses HTML's syntax to express your application's components clearly. It is designed for web, desktop, and mobile platforms. Next up is what exactly is TypeScript. Now, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that offers excellent consistency. It is highly recommended as it provides some syntactic sugar and makes the code base more comfortable to understand and maintain. Ultimately, TypeScript code compiles down to JavaScript that can run efficiently in any environment. Now, typically, TypeScript is installed as an npm package and thus can be installed with the following command, that is npm install -g TypeScript. Moving on to our third question, what exactly is data binding and which type of data binding does Angular deploy? Now, data binding is a phenomenon that allows any internet user to manipulate web page elements. Now, it generally uses dynamic HTML and does not require any complex scripting or programming. We use data binding in pages that contain interactive components such as forms, calculators, tutorials, and games. Data binding makes incremental display of a web page more convenient. When it comes to Angular, it uses the two-way data binding. Any changes made to the user interface are reflected in the corresponding model state. Conversely, any changes in the model state are reflected in the UI state. This allows the framework to connect the DOM to the model data via the controller. Next question, what are single-page applications? Now, single-page applications are web applications that load just once, with new features just being mere additions to the user interface. It does not load new HTML pages to display the content. Instead, it's generated dynamically. This is made possible through JavaScript's ability to manipulate the DOM elements on the existing page itself. An SPA approach is faster, thus providing a seamless user experience. Differentiate between Angular and AngularJS. Now, here's a simple table for you. So here are the features that we're going to differentiate the two on the basis of. First is language. AngularJS uses JavaScript while Angular uses TypeScript. When it comes to architecture, AngularJS supports the model view controller design while Angular uses components and directives. AngularJS is not supported by mobile browsers while Angular supports all mobile browsers. AngularJS does not support dependency injection while Angular does. When it comes to routing, @route provider is used to provide routing information in the case of AngularJS, and in case of Angular, @route configuration is used to define routing information. When it comes to management, AngularJS is difficult to manage with an increase in source code size, while Angular is better structured, easy to create, and can manage bigger applications. Next up, what are decorators in Angular? Decorators are a design pattern or functions that define how Angular features work. Now, they are used to make prior modifications to a class, service, or filter. Angular supports 4 types of decorators, namely class decorators, property decorators, method decorators, and parameter decorators. Next question, mention some advantages of Angular. First up is custom components. Now, Angular enables users to build their own components that can pack functionality along with rendering logic into reusable pieces. This is achieved with the help of these components. Data binding. As discussed earlier, Angular enables users to effortlessly move data from JavaScript code to the view and react to users' events without having to write any code manually. Angular supports dependency injection, which enables users to write modular services and inject them wherever they need it. When it comes to testing, tests are first-class tools, and Angular has been built from ground up with testability in mind. You will have the ability to test every part of your application, and that is highly recommended. Next up is comprehensive. Angular is a full-fledged framework and provides out-of-the-box solutions for server communication, routing with your application, and more. Lastly, Angular is cross-platform and compatible with multiple browsers. An Angular application can typically run on all browsers, be it Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and operating systems like Windows, macOS, and Linux. What's new with Angular 10? First up is that older versions of TypeScript are not supported. Previous versions of Angular supported TypeScript 3.6, 3.7, and even 3.8. But with Angular 10, TypeScript bumped to TypeScript 3.9. Warnings about common JS imports. Now, logging of unknown property bindings or element names in templates is increased to the error level, which was previously a warning. Angular now supports an optional strict setting, which offers a stricter project setup when you create a new workspace. There's an addition of ngCC features with a program-based entry point finder. There are common compiler updates and updated URL routing. Angular 10 has several deprecated APIs that were previously redundant. With Angular 10 version, there have been a number of bug fixes, important ones being the compiler avoiding undefined expressions and the core avoiding a migration error. New default browser configuration. Browser configuration for new projects has been upgraded to outdo older and less used browsers. Next up is core. All the warnings will be now logged in as errors. Next update is converting pre-IV code. Now all the pre-IV dependencies from NPM should be transformed to IV dependencies, which is supposed to take place as a precursor to running ngtsc at the application. And lastly, we have service workers. For the service worker, a fix has been put in for a situation in which there was a chance that the service worker would not register when there is a long-running task or a recurring timeout. Next up is what are templates in Angular. Now, Angular templates are written with HTML that contains Angular-specific elements and attributes. Now, in combination with model and controllers information, these templates can be rendered to provide a dynamic view to the user. Now, templates are a very predominant feature of Angular that describe how information can be displayed in the view. Next question is what are annotations in Angular? Now, these annotations are used to create an annotation array. They are basically the metadata set on the class that is used to reflect the metadata library. What are directives in Angular? Directives are attributes that allow the user to write new HTML syntax specific to their applications. Now, these execute whenever the Angular compiler finds them in the DOM. Now, again, Angular supports three different types of directives. There are component directives, attribute directives, and structural directives. Next up, what is AOT compilation and what are some of its advantages? Now, AOT, that stands for Ahead of Time Compiler, basically converts the Angular HTML and TypeScript into JavaScript code during the build phase. That is, before the browser downloads and runs the code. So basically, all the HTML and TypeScript code is converted to JavaScript during the build phase, which means no additional time is spent on converting it into JavaScript later during the run phase, right? So when it comes to advantages, of course, there's faster rendering. There are fewer asynchronous requests. It has smaller Angular framework download size. There's quick detection of errors, and this also offers better security. Moving on to the next question, what are components? Now, components are the most basic building blocks of the UI in an Angular application. Now, every component is associated with a template and is a subset of directives. Only one component can be instantiated per element in a template. Now, an Angular application typically consists of a root component, which is basically the app component, and then it branches out into other components, creating a hierarchy. Now, every component is decorated with the help of @component_decorator, which provides additional information. And component must belong to the ng module. Lastly, components implement something called the lifecycle hooks. You will learn about them a little later in the video. Next up, what are pipes in Angular? Now, pipes are simple functions that are designed to accept a particular input value, process this value, and return an output which is a transformed value. Now, Angular supports several built-in pipes. However, you can also create custom pipes that cater to your needs. But to speak about a few salient features, pipes are defined using the pipe symbol. Pipes can be chained with other pipes, and pipes can be provided with arguments by using the colon sign. Next up, what are pure pipes? Now, these pipes are pipes that use pure functions. As a result of this, a pure pipe doesn't use any internal state, and the output remains the same as long as the parameters passed stay the same. Angular calls a pure pipe only when it detects a change in the parameters being passed. Now, a single instance of a pure pipe is used throughout all components. Next up, what are impure pipes? Now, for every change detection cycle in Angular, these impure pipes are called regardless of the change in the input fields. As long as there's a change detected, these pipes are called. As a result, multiple pipe instances are created for these pipes. Now, inputs passed to these pipes can also be mutable. By default, all pipes are pure. However, you can also mention impure pipes using the pure property. Now, here's a code for specifying impure pipes. You can use the pure property and either mention true or false. True meaning it's a pure pipe, and false indicates that it's an impure pipe. Next up, what is the pipe transform interface? Now, as the name suggests, the interface receives an input value and transforms it into the desired format with a transform method. It is typically used to implement custom pipes. Now, here's again a small piece of code. Now, you can see that the pipe transform interface is being used, which in turn executes the transform method. Now, this transform method is the one that is responsible to change your input and give a transformed output. Moving on, what is ng module? Now, ng modules are basically containers that reserve a block of code to an application domain or a workflow. Now, the @ng module takes a metadata object that describes how to compile a components template and generate an injector at runtime. In addition to this, ng module also identifies the module's components, directives, services, pipes, and it also ensures that it makes them public so that external components can use them. All of this is taken care of by the ng module. Next up, what are filters in Angular? Now, filters are used to format an expression and present it to the user. They can be used in view templates, controllers, or services. Now, to name a few, there's date filter, which formats a date to a specified format. There's filter that selects a subset of items from an array. There's the JSON filter, which formats an object to a JSON string. There's limit to, which limits an array or a string into a specified number of elements or characters. Then there's lowercase, which formats a string to lowercase, and so on. Moving on to the next question, what is view encapsulation in Angular? Now, view encapsulation basically defines whether the template and styles defined within the component can affect the application or vice versa. Angular provides 3 encapsulation strategies. There's emulated encapsulation, which means that the styles from the main HTML propagate to the component. Then there is native, which indicates that the styles from the main HTML do not propagate to the component, meaning it does not affect the component. And lastly, there's none, which means that styles from the component propagate back to the main HTML and therefore are visible to all the components on the page. Now, this indicates any different types of changes and how it is affecting the entire application. Moving on, what are controllers? Now, as the name suggests, controllers control the data of Angular applications. They are regular JavaScript objects, and the ng controller directive defines the application controller. Next question, what do you understand by scope in Angular? Now, the scope in Angular binds the HTML, that is basically the view, and the JavaScript, that is the controller. It is also an object with the available properties and methods required for your application. Now, when you make a controller in Angular, you pass the $scope object as an argument. Moving on to the most commonly asked question, explain the lifecycle hooks in Angular. As discussed earlier, every component in Angular has a lifecycle. Angular creates and renders these components and also destroys them before removing them from the document object model. It is achieved with the help of these lifecycle hooks. Now let's have a look at them. First up is ng on changes. Now this responds when Angular sets or resets data-bound input properties. Ng on it is a hook that initializes the directive or a component after Angular first displays the data-bound properties and sets the component's input properties. ng-do-check detects and acts upon the changes that Angular can't or won't detect on its own. ng-after-content-init responds after ng projects external content into the component's view. ng-after-content-checked responds after Angular checks the content projected into the component. ng-after-view-init responds after Angular initializes the component's views and child views. ng-after-view-checked responds after Angular checks the component's views and the child views. Lastly, there's ng-on-destroy, which cleans up just before Angular destroys the directive or the component. Moving on to the next question, what is string interpolation in Angular? Now, string interpolation is a one-way data binding technique that is used by Angular. Now, it outputs the data from TypeScript code to HTML view. It is typically denoted with the help of curly braces, and it helps display data from the component to the view. To help you understand its working, I've created a variable called name here in my app.component.ts file and initialized it to Simplilearn. And back in my HTML file, I've created a header tag which displays the name of the company is, and I've interpolated here with the help of double curly braces. So when I run the file, the output looks something like this. The name of the company is Simplilearn. So this is how string interpolation is achieved in Angular. Moving on to next question. What are template statements? Template statements are properties or methods used in HTML for responding to user events. Now with these template statements, the application that you create or you're working on can have the capability to engage users through actions such as submitting forms or displaying dynamic content. The most common example is the button tag. The template here is delete hero. This method is called when the user clicks on the button. So this brings interactivity to your application. With that, we come to the end of the first section, which included the beginner level questions. Moving on, let's look at some advanced level questions. What is the difference between ahead of time and just-in-time compilation? Now, ahead of time compilation converts your code during the build time before the browser downloads and runs the code. In case of just-in-time compilation, this process is a way of compiling computer code to machine code during the execution phase. AOT ensures faster rendering to the browser, while just-in-time is basically a dynamic compilation. In case of ahead of time compiling, the user should include the --AOT option with the ng build or ng serve command. NGIT compilation is the default compilation when you run the ng build or ng serve CLI commands. Next up, explain the @component decorator. Now here's a simple screenshot of what the @component decorator encompasses. It is basically a TypeScript class that is used to create components. This genre of class is then decorated with the @component decorator. The decorator's purpose is to accept a metadata object that provides relevant information about the component. Now the image above shows an app component, which is a pure TypeScript class decorated with the @component decorator. The object that gets accepted by the decorator provides properties like template URL, selectors, style URLs, and many more. Now here the template URL property points to an HTML file defining what you see on the application. Moving ahead, what are services in Angular? Angular services perform tasks that are used by multiple components. Now these tasks could be data fetching, network connections, or database management, among others. They perform all the operational tasks for the components and avoid rewriting of code. A service can be written once and then injected into all the components that use it. Generally, components are used to only display information on the UI. They do not perform any other backend tasks. To perform tasks like validating information or network connections, etc., you can make use of a service. One advantage is that this service can be injected into multiple components that make use of the same piece of code. With this, you can avoid redundancy. Moving on, what are promises and observables? Now, while both the components deal with asynchronous events in Angular, promises handle one such event at a time, while observables handle a sequence of events over some time. So to give you a brief explanation, promises emit a single value at a time, while observables are only executed when subscribed to them using the subscribe method. Now promises also execute immediately after they are created and they're not cancelable, while observables help perform operations like for each, filter, retry, etc. Promises push errors to the child promises, and observables can be unsubscribed to so that the listener stops receiving further values. Next up, what is ng on init and how is it defined? Now again, here's a small snippet of code. ng on init is a lifecycle hook, as we discussed earlier, and it is a callback method that is run by Angular to indicate that a component has been created. It takes no parameters and returns a void type. So I'm sure you can see here in the code, it takes no parameters and returns a void. Next up, explain the use of ng for in a tag, or explain the ng for directive. Now the ng for directive is basically like a for loop. It is used to build lists and tables in HTML templates. So in simple terms, this directive is used to iterate over an array or an object and create template for each such element. Now in the snippet you can see there is let items in item list, and then I've string interpolated the variable item. So let item here creates a local variable that will be available inside the template. Of items indicates that we are iterating over the items iterable, and the asterisk before ng for creates a parent template. Next up, what are template and reactive forms? So there are two different methods to create forms. We have the template driven approach and we have the reactive form approach. So let's have a look at them. In case of template-driven approach, the conventional form tag is used to create forms. Angular automatically interprets and creates a form object representation for this tag. Controls can be added to the form using the ng model tag. Multiple controls can be grouped using the ng control group module. Now, a form value can be generated using the form.value object, and form data is exported as JSON values. Basic HTML validations can be used to validate the form fields. In the case of custom validations, directives can be used. When it comes to reactive forms, this approach basically revolves around data flows and propagation of change. Now, with reactive forms, the component directly manages the data flows between the form controls and the data models. Reactive forms are code-driven, unlike template-driven approach. Reactive forms break the traditional declarative approach and eliminate the anti-pattern of updating data via the two-way data binding method. Typically, reactive form control creation is synchronous and can be unit tested with synchronous programming techniques. Moving on, what is Bootstrap? How is it added to Angular? Now, Bootstrap is a powerful toolkit. It is a collection of basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript tools for creating and building responsive web applications. There are two ways to embed Bootstrap libraries. First up is using the Bootstrap CDN, which is the Content Delivery Network. Now, this enables users to load the CSS and JavaScript files remotely from its servers. The other way is to use Angular Bootstrap via NPM. Now, this is used to add Bootstrap to your Angular project by installing it into your project folder. Now, you can use commands like npm install bootstrap and npm install jQuery to install them for your project. If you wish to learn Bootstrap in detail, I highly suggest you check out our video on Angular Bootstrap. The tutorial explains how to embed Bootstrap and use it to create and good-looking Angular applications. What is eager and lazy loading? Eager loading is the default module loading strategy. Now, all the feature modules under eager loading are loaded before your application even starts. This is typically used for small size applications since lesser modules are used. All of these modules are loaded initially, which makes running of these kind of applications extremely fast. When it comes to lazy loading, all the loading happens dynamically. All feature modules are loaded on demand. It is used for bigger applications where the modules are not required at the start of applications. This makes the application faster since no time is spent on loading unnecessary modules. Next up, what type of DOM does Angular implement? DOM, or Document Object Model, treats an XML or HTML document as a tree structure in which each node is an object representing a part of the document. Now, Angular uses the regular DOM. This updates the entire tree structure of HTML tags until it reaches the data that has to be updated. Now, to ensure that the speed and performance are not affected, Angular implements something called as the change detection. Next up, how is dependency injection achieved in Angular? Now, dependencies are objects or services that a component needs to perform functions, correct? Now, with the help of dependency injection, these classes can request dependencies from external sources rather than creating them on their own. Here I've created a service called demo service using the command ng service demo service, and I've also added the small snippet of code when you create that service. Now these services can be injected to your main component and perform various functions. Next up, how does Angular routing work? Now, I'm sure you must have observed that the URL changes every time you click on your user interface on an application, correct? Every time you navigate through the application or move from one page to another, the URL changes. Now, this means that the application is being routed or you're navigating through the application. So basically, routing helps navigate through a web application, especially in case of single page applications. Now, as discussed earlier, single page applications are loaded just once. So any new content that is being displayed is just a mere addition. It's not being loaded again. So routing plays a vital role in case of single page applications. Typically, it is specified with the help of the / and followed by a path that defines the new content. Now, I'm just taking the same example that I took before. This was the example for string interpolation. However, you can see that we have a navigation bar here with 4 different options for that is home, about, services and login. And for home and login, I've created a path and added routing to it. So when I click on the home icon, you can see that some content is being displayed onto the screen. And if you observe, you can see that there is a / with the path name home here, which indicates that routing has occurred. Same with login. When I click on it, the path changes and the login page appears. If you wish to learn the concept of routing, I suggest you check out a video. The tutorial explains routing in detail. Moving on, what are form control and form groups? Now, a form control is basically a class that enables validation. For each input field, an instance of this class is created. And these instances help check the values of the field and see if they are touched, untouched, dirty, pristine, valid, invalid, or so on. So for every field in the form, the data that is being provided is validated with the help of these controls. If it is dirty, it means that the value has been changed. If the data provided holds good for a particular condition, then the control is said to be valid, and so on. With the help of these controls, you can determine if the value provided is legitimate or not. This can be achieved with the help of form control. When it comes to form group, the form group class represents a group of controls. Now, a form can have multiple control groups. The form group class returns true if all the controls are valid and also provides validation errors if any. Next up is how is testing achieved in Angular. Now, Angular uses Jasmine to run various tests. The Jasmine framework allows various functionalities to write different kinds of test cases. The task runner for these tests is typically Karma, and Karma uses a configuration file to set the startup, reporters, and the testing framework. Next question is what is package.json? Now, npm installs package.json when a new workspace is created. Now, this file includes a starter set of packages, some of which are required by Angular. Now, typically it's organized into 2 groups. One is dependencies. These are essential to run your applications. And we have dev dependencies. These are essential to develop applications. So with that, we come to the end of this session. I hope these interview questions help you crack your next interview. If you have any doubts or queries, let us know in the comment section below. So thank you so much for being here and watch out for more videos from us. Until then, keep learning and stay tuned to Simplilearn.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.